this acceptance of the Khalifa outside India was instigated. I'm using very consciously the word instigated by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and the Muslims were separated by the larger Hindu population in terms of identity, in terms of demands, in terms of ways of life. And they asserted a separate right because then they said that we are people who can trace our origin to some to a lineage which begins from outside India, to the Arabic world, to the Middle Eastern world. So this great attachment to the Middle Eastern world of the Indian Muslim was created 1920 onwards. Ganga taranga ramaniya jata kalapam Gauri nirantar vibhushita vam bhagam Narayana priyam anangamadapaharam Varanasi purapatim bhaj Vishwanatham Varanasi purapatim bhaj Vishwanatham. The present day conflict, which has taken many shapes in India, but in the last 4 or 5 years is somehow or the other sliding into a conflict between the two major communities in India, the Hindu community and the Muslim community. As you all know, that in the last 4 or 5 years, with the Ram Mandir issue, the resolution of the issue by Supreme Court, beginning of the temple construction, and later on developments, there seems to be a lot of resentment among the minority community regarding the developments that have happened. Now, there is a long history of Hindu-Muslim conflict going back to almost 1300 years in India. But apart from that, if you see the recent conflict, to my mind, this conflict is enshrined in the very constitution which was agreed upon in 1950 and adopted by the new independent state of Bharat. What is the problem? And I very clearly, without any hesitation, call it a problem. What is the problem which is rooted in our constitution? You see, most people refuse to admit this. Most people do not talk about it in very clear terms because they think it is not a matter of certain constitutional rights which are clashing, but it is a matter of failure either at the religious level or at the level of priests and organization, temples and churches and mosques and organization, or they think it is merely a conflict between orthodox Maulvis and forward looking people in India. Now, having said that, one has to pinpoint as to where this problem becomes constitutional. I would put it this way. First of all, the very division of the Indian population into minority and majority on the basis, largely on the basis of religion, language, or something very indecisive such as culture. division of the Indian population into minority and majority on the basis of religion, culture, language, etc., is something which was not part of the Indian social polity, Indian social system earlier. We had various kinds of communities. We had various kinds of religious denominations, dharmic, Brahmic, and within the dharmic, various kinds of divisions like Shaiva, Vaishnava, Bauddha, Astik, Nastik, Lingayat, and various other matantaras, and people living in all kinds of diversity. But we never looked upon these people in terms of minority or majority. For instance, let me take a very specific example. There were some communities, you can today, in modern terms, call them religious communities, or in ancient times, you would call them communities based on a darshana, or on a mata, or a matantara, or a prasthan. These are some of the ancient terms which were used for denomination. What is now used as denomination in judicial discourse and even in constitution, that denomination was indicated by all these words which I just used: prasthan, mata, matantara, darshana, etc. So there were communities which were very small in number. For instance, let me take a community of Pashupatas of 2nd, 3rd century AD, who were Shaivas, and they believed in their founder as Pashupatinath, and they were called Pashupatas, and they were largely Shaiv, and they followed the Shaiv darshan. But they had a lifestyle and they had a method of worship, they had their temples, and it is all historically recorded. And the tradition is still alive in some parts of Gujarat. Now, these people were never in very large number, but nobody considered them insignificant, or nobody considered them uh, mm, socially backward, or to be helped, or to be compensated, or to be looked after, because they were few in number. You see, this whole concept that we have to look upon a community in terms of its numerical strength is a modern phenomenon. And let me tell you, it is not a democratic phenomenon. Today, wherever there is democracy, it has a role to play in seizing power through democratic means. But then, this whole business of people belonging to a way of life or thought or philosophy and having a certain number, this is a classification which was done by the colonial people. The colonizers of Europe, the British, the Germans, the French, the Portuguese, the Belgians, all these people, when they came to their colonies, they started studying the people, their ways of life, under what they called ethnography, ethnology, or ethnic studies. Ethnic is a Greek word. In ancient Greek, it meant jati, or a community. And this word ethnos was used by colonial anthropologists in order to indicate the description of the people whom the colonizers were governing. So let us take our example. The British come here, they say, who are the people living? They say the people living are Hindus, they are Muslims. Among Muslims, you have various smaller and larger other subdivisions. Similarly, Among Hindus, you would have subdivisions. They classified the whole thing, they analyzed the whole thing, they made anthropological charts of the population, and it became the basis of their defining the ruled, defining the population whom they were going to govern. And then they developed a whole, along with anthropology and anthropological descriptions, they developed a whole system of study which they called Indology in the case of India, or Africology, or whatever in the case of other. And there they said that, well, these are the people whom we are governing. And these people are this, 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 this. Now, this kind of division was never done in either ancient India or in medieval India, because the population was recognized in terms of certain very simple, verifiable communities, and the state had an approach to them. For instance, the Islamic rulers of India, they considered largely all Hindus as non-believers, non-Muslims, as kafirs, as people whom they had a right, a God-given right to govern. And therefore, for them, it hardly mattered whether somebody was a Buddhist, or if somebody was a Shaiv or a Jain. So, for them, the biggest classification was worshipper of images, Buddh Parasta, somebody who worships images. So then the Jains and the Buddhas and the Vaishnavas, and they are all alike. And then you had a right to destroy them, you had a right to govern them, you had a right to convert them. Now, this was the Islamic system. In this, there was nothing called an analysis or control of the population by defining them, because they never bothered to define. They said either you are Muslim or you are a non-believer. So the division was very clear between a Momin, a believer, a Muslim, and a non-Muslim. The British started a whole different method of approach of governance. The Islamic principles of governance were based upon a very simple distinction, the distinction of believer and non-believer. So the non-believer would have to pay jizya, the non-believer would have to live within certain limits, the non-believer would have to be protected, or the non-believer could be treated in whatever way the Sharia law prescribed. The British come and adopt a very different method. They provide a framework of liberality, equality, a liberty, the French Revolution values, but within that, they categorize people. And then they say, well, if you belong to this community, then this is your right, and no more. If you belong to the other community, then this is your right and no more. So, this classification of making distinctions between communities and giving them specific or individual rights is something which Western anthropology, Western colonial attitude brings into India. And this is the beginning of what may be called the anthropological study of India, or anthropological classification through Western terms. You see, it is not universal or it is not humanitarian. It's based upon the interest of the governors, the white people, and the white man's burden. So, this classification included for them a distinction of minority and majority. This begins after 1857 in India. In 1857, the British seized power largely from the Muslim rulers, because the Muslim rulers, not just the Mughal emperor, but quite a few Muslim rulers and non-Muslim rulers were in power, and they were defeated. So the British Raj then, when it started classifying, they said, well, there are people of this kind, this kind, this kind. And how shall we mutually adjust them? You see, it was not that everybody would be treated equal. Everybody would not be treated in the same manner. People would be given special concessions or special punishments. For instance, in India, the classification of a huge number of people who were poor, who lived in the forest or on the fringes, they were classified as scheduled tribes or even criminal tribes. So, this whole business of thugs, you see, they thought they demonized the thugs and they made a community into a criminal community. So, dozens and dozens of communities in India were classified as criminal communities. Then some other communities were classified as warrior races, upright and very faithful, because they were faithful to the to the British. And the prime example is of the Sikhs, because the Sikhs helped the British even in the 1857 rebellion or First War of Independence, whatever you may like to call it. So the Sikhs became good warrior races, and those who could, uh, regular Jats who could, grow hair and have the panch kakar, the five kakkas, they were sanctified as Sikhs, and a whole community was given a certain image. You know, the color of the turban, the shape of the kada, everything the British, Macauliffe and others gave them, and they created a whole community which they had defined. So, this way of defining communities, calling some good, calling some others bad, was the British method. For instance, the Brahmin was singled out as the most vicious of all, the most devious of all. The Brahmin was considered to be the oppressor in the creation of the caste system. Now, it's so silly that Brahmins who always lived on begging, who were all the time living austere lives and extending their palm to beg from Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Shudras also, because Brahmins did accept certain things from Shudras as well. They were considered as oppressors, and a whole discourse to the present day has been constructed as if uh, Manu was a Brahmin and every text of law was written by a Brahmin, as if nobody had a role to play. It is only a small coterie of Brahmins sitting somewhere who manufactured all these things. So it's like, the certain theories which come out of the American academia, theory of critical theory or wokeism, theories that come out of American academia today, they were imagined as if there was a cult of people who was dominating the whole Indian population. So, this business of defining the Indian population was done by the colonialists, and within this, they created then later on the distinction between the minority and the majority. So, after 1890 or so, the Muslims came to acquire a very special status of minority people. And in 1904 or 1905, I think, they were given special constituencies. And they were made distinct people with distinct law, and people who were entirely different from Hindus. So, whatever uh, commonness that had existed in the last 600 to 700 years between the Hindus and Muslims, it was wiped out. And different personal laws were made for Muslims. Muslims were not operating or leading their lives according to exact Sharia law. even though they were Muslims. They had all kinds of customs which they followed. And even today, in what is called the Pansmanda Muslims, that is the Muslims who are not Ashraf or who don't claim themselves to be coming from Iran, Iraq, and Arabia, those Muslims, they have a way of life which is very much similar to and Hindus, and they share a huge number of rituals, customs, and activities. So all this was wiped out and made into separate compartments by British anthropology. So here you made the distinction that minorities would have special rights. So it is around 1905, then in 1920, uh, another thing was added. And this thing was that the Khilafat movement created a feeling of loyalty among Indian Muslims, not to the Indian continent or the Indian people, because at this time there was nothing like the Indian state. It was the British state. So not to the Indian continent or to the Indian people, but to somebody in Turkey. So support the Khalifa, who is several thousands of miles away, who has nothing to do with your life, whom you don't even know what is his name, and who has been discarded in Turkey by the Turkish people themselves, who has been deposed by Kemal Ataturk, who was creating a new Turkey, which was also supported by the British because he Europeanized Turkey. So a Khilafat movement was supported in India by our leaders like Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi very erroneously. And then you granted the right to the Muslims to support somebody thousands of miles away and thus create a loyalty to the so called Muslim Ummah or to the Khalifa. That is why the whole beginning of Muslim loyalty beyond the Indian borders got reaffirmed. You see, this did not exist earlier. The Mughal Empire was not loyal to any Khalifa sitting somewhere. I mean, they may send them gifts or they may send them a few things, but they were people who wanted to govern here. Although they were very conscious that they were separate from Hindus, that they had a superior right to govern because they were Muslims. So that discourse did exist, but they were not vassals or they were not followers of some foreign power who was sitting outside. There may be a notional acceptance of some kind of a Khalifa somewhere, but it was not a real thing. This notion, this acceptance of the Khalifa outside India was instigated. I'm using very consciously the word instigated by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and the Muslims were separated by the larger Hindu population in terms of identity, in terms of demands, in terms of ways of life. And they asserted a separate right because then they said that we are people who can trace our origin to some to a lineage which begins from outside India, to the Arabic world, to the Middle Eastern world. So this great attachment to the Middle Eastern world of the Indian Muslim was created 1920 onwards. And you find that this is the real bone of contention today. That is why you find that a Muslim will not name his son as Surya or as Sunil, but that he would go for a very, very Quranic name. He would, trying to find a name which is entirely connected to the Arabic tradition. So it should be an Arabic name. So this hinging upon Arabic culture as the origin of Islamic culture is a result of the anthropological and ethnographic studies that the British created. And then they created the concept of minorities. Now, what happens is, you know history well enough, that the Islamic minority asked for a separate portion, nearly one fifth of India, to be given to them, and hence Pakistan was given to them. And I'm not going to talk about the disastrous consequences of this division and partition. As a matter of fact, this was largely envisaged and executed by the British also. The British in 1922 resolved the Greco Turkish conflict, that is, the conflict between Greece and Turkey, by creating two very separate sovereign states, the Hellenic Republic of Greece and the state of Turkey. Now, what they said, that all Christians who are living in the Turkish part or in the Byzantine part would be shifted, transferred to Greece, and all the Muslims living in present day Greece, or at that time it was Greece, the peninsula, would be transferred to Turkey. So they executed a division of population. All Muslims will come to Turkey, all Christians will go to Greece. And this was thought to be the solution of the Hindu Muslim conflict for India also. This was executed in 1922-23. Population was transferred slowly within 5 years. It was done under state supervision. So there were very few massacres or untoward incidents. They did happen, but not so much like as they happened in terms of lakhs of people dying in India. And this idea was then created in Cambridge University, and it was floated as the idea of Pakistan. And Allama Iqbal and various other people started supporting it, and it was executed in 1947. But there was a big difference. The difference was that instead of executing it in the same manner as it was envisioned, as it was thought that there would be a transfer of population, and as it was mentioned in the partition document, the new idea of India as a secular state and Pakistan as a Islamic state was accepted. As a matter of fact, even the Islamic State was considered to be some kind of a quasi secular state, because Jinnah said that no, we will have our minorities. However, they were very clear that Pakistan was an Islamic state. But India, instead of being called a Hindu nation or a Hindu state, which was the intention around 1922, when they followed the pattern which they had implemented in Europe, between Turkey and Greece, instead of doing that, they made India into a secular state where the Muslims who wanted to stay back were allowed to stay. Now, this was the second step of creating a minority, a special minority within the Hindu majority. You see, we have to be very clear what has happened in history. We only think of so-called secular state, so-called secular constitution, and we begin everything from there. But we don't see how this happened in 50 years before 1947, or 50 years or 100 years prior to 1950. This whole concept of the secular state, how did it come to be good to develop? Now, this is where the issue between majority and minority became a very different kind of issue. During 1930s or 1940, the issue was whether the country should be divided or not, whether the minority can live with the majority or not. And it was decided that it cannot. Muslims cannot live with Hindus. That's why you accepted partition. There was no idea of the secular state in 1935 or 1940 or 1950. Because if it had been there would have been no partition. If people believed, if Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi believed, if Jawaharlal Nehru believed, if Sardar Patel believed, or any other great leader of that time really believed that it should be a totally secular state in the sense that Hindus, Muslims, this, that, everybody can exist here, as it was uh, propagated in 1950. If people believed in this in 1935, then how could there be a talk of partition? You believe that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together, and therefore there was partition. But yet, after partition, the concept of the secular Indian state was manufactured. I say manufactured because you cannot grant 1/5 of your land to somebody on the basis that because they are of a particular religious domination, therefore they have a right to the land also. Once you grant them that, then they are obliged, then they are obliged to go and live on that land alone. They can't claim both things. They can't have their cake and eat it too. But this is exactly what happened in 47, and the Indian Constitution was made. Now, when the 1950 Constitution was made, this whole business of minority enters a phase of what is called inequality. Now, minorities are no longer minorities. Now, minorities are special people with special concessions. So, in 47, the Muslim population of India largely democratically votes for the formation of Pakistan, and only a few of them go to Pakistan. The majority of those who voted for Pakistan continue to stay in Pakistan. In India. You see, I hear sometimes many people like Owaisi and various other Islamic leaders saying that we chose not to go. Obviously, they didn't choose, their fathers or grandfathers chose. They were born here, so they had no choice. But their grandfathers and their fathers chose not to go because they wanted the best of both the worlds. And this is a fact. Because you cannot have both the worlds. If you believe that you want the land to be divided, then you are obliged to go there. This is what happened in Turkey and Greece. The British executed it in this manner. All Christians were sent from Ankara and various other cities of present day Turkey to Athens and to smaller towns uh, like Thessaloniki and other places in Greece. All Christians they came. There was a huge influx of refugees, Christian refugees, in 1925, 30, and even later. It continued for almost 10 years. And similarly, Muslims had to go out and come to Turkey. But in India, we had both the things together. We had division and partition. In other words, we gave a special concession to those theocratic Muslims who believed in the Islamic State. And we made, instead of making a Hindu state, we made a so-called secular state. And within that secular state, we treated the Muslims as a minority on the basis of their numbers. And then we created a constitution in which minority shall get special rights, rights which are more equal than the majority. So the minority was made, and largely the Muslim minority was made more equal than the Hindu majority. And today, after 74 years now almost, today, the minority, and not just the Muslim minority, the so-called category of minority, people belonging to that category of minority in India, as per our constitution, are more equal than the majority. We all know majority means Hindus. So we can use the word Hindus instead of majority. Now, minority is largely Muslim, but then the game started of creating other minorities. It was on the basis of minority that Master Tara Singh wanted a Punjabi Suba or a special state for the Sikhs. But later on, he gave up that specific demand. But that demand has now resurfaced in the name of Khalistan. So it is the same thought. Then, afterwards in India, we created several other minorities, like Buddhists were made into minorities, then Jains were made into minorities, Lingayats were made into minority. And politically, it has become very convenient for the political class to create minorities. Because you can now play the game of giving special concessions to them and ensuring their votes. So this whole business of dividing the people into minority and majority has now degenerated into a game of numbers. Demographic pressure. We are not living on the basis of religion. We are not living on the basis of human rights. We are not living on the basis of equality as it was envisaged by Rousseau. Equality, fraternity, and liberty. We are living on the basis of demographic pressure. That if you can categorize yourself as a demography defined as minority, then you get special rights. Therefore, now in the last 20 years, there is a scramble in India for people to claim minority status because that pays more, that gives more. Now you would ask me, why am I saying this? How am I saying that minorities have special status? That minorities are not people who have to be guarded against. You see, what we were taught since 1950 was that Muslims who stayed behind need to be protected. People who have taken a huge chunk of land, because they stayed with the larger piece of land, they had to be protected. So Muslims had to be protected from Hindus who gave them nearly 1/5 of their country. This was one of the biggest sham which was propagated, that Muslims had to be protected from Hindus because they were smaller in number. So they had to be protected. You can understand this whole business of numbers is not real. This business of numbers is based upon a discrimination in the favor of the smaller number to give special rights. Of course, there is another aspect to it also, that certain sections of population claim special concessions because it is believed that Hindus oppress their ancestors. So if the Brahmins oppress the ancestors of certain classes, which are now called backward classes, if they were oppressed 500 or 600 or 1000 or 2000 years ago, as per Manusmriti, then the Brahmins and the Vaishyas and the Baniyas own to them now in the present day a special concession, compensatory discrimination. So the doctrine of compensatory discrimination has been practiced and is politically very convenient in the age where one person has one vote. It is something which is extremely convenient to capture power. And therefore, this classification, which was started by the colonial people, by the colonizers, against the colonized, continues. Because now the ruling class within India is the colonizer. Those who are in political power, whether it is the Congress or the BJP, they become the colonizers for rest of the population, because now they can classify the population in terms of minority and majority, and what rights are to be given to them and what concessions are to be given to them. So we are neither in practice following the traditional ancient system of practicing dharma, which is based upon a dharmic equality of obligations and reward. The ancient system was that you perform your duties, and if you perform your duties, then certain things follow as your earning, what is now called right, but as your earning, as something which you deserve, your adhikar. Adhikar in ancient language does not mean right, but it means something which I have earned. So if I have given dan, then I have earned the right to a good reputation. So the whole dharmic concept is not based upon my asking or my entitlement because of my color, creed, number, religion, etc., but because of my performance of certain duties. See, this was the ancient Indian system which continued. And this was, in a way, a system which was followed even under Islamic rule. Because under Islamic law, you are also asked to perform certain duties as a Momin. The concept of your performing duties is very different, and therefore earning something in society is very different from our present system, in which we are supposed to have rights to ask things from the state. We earn our rights not because we have performed duties, but because either we are a woman, or because we are dark in color, or because we speak a certain language, or because we follow a certain religion, or because we come from certain part of India. You see, our parameters are different. Now the state is obliged to give us something because of our natural being. So just because I am born a woman, therefore I get certain rights. Just because I am born um, a scheduled caste or a scheduled tribe, I certain entitlements come to me. This is a very different system from the ancient medieval Indian system of dharmic system, where I perform certain duties and therefore I earn certain rights. It's exactly the opposite of it. Now, it is within this context that you have to see the minority and the majority. Just because you are a minority, you have earned certain rights. So you have earned the right to be coached specially for IAS because you are a minority. You can ask the state to be given special tuition. You can ask the state to be given admission in colleges or schools or whatever. The whole business of minority and majority, therefore, becomes a system which is based upon a classification of human beings in which there can be no equality of any kind. It is a conceived and a misconceived equality because you are smaller in number, therefore, you deserve concession in order to be equalized. Because it is presumed that those who are majority are oppressing you. This is a peculiar philosophy which the white man brought to the colonies. Because the white man has a huge amount of guilt. The white man enslaved the blacks, and they have a huge amount of guilt sitting on them, and therefore they want special concessions for the blacks. This was not the situation in India. Now they're imposing this kind of pattern on us by telling us that no, you also have people whom you have oppressed, and therefore you have to bring up those people. So you manufactured a history of oppression in order to deflect from your history of oppression, which is naked, blatant, and well recorded. In India, we do not have a history where Jains were massacred, or Buddhists were massacred, or Shaivas were massacred. We have a history where there were certain conflicts and maybe some even here and there bloody conflict once in a while. But we do not have a history where people were burnt on a stake because they followed a different religion. But now we are being told that yes, this is what happened in India also. So this whole business of ethnographic studies is creating a cultural analysis and identity of India, which is based upon totally the experience of the colonizer. And it is this that we have to understand. If you really want to create a system in which people are equal, then there can be only one method. And that method is that under the law of the land, everybody has to perform duties. And the person shall be rewarded according to the performance. Now, the laws and the duties cannot be the same as they were, let us say, in India 2000 years ago or India 500 years ago. They would be different. And the Indian tradition wants it to be different. Because the Indian tradition of Smriti says that law, that achar, that dharma, in the sense of social duty, is something that changes. There are certain things that were very good and useful once upon a time, but they cannot be implemented now. You have to have a different system. So the Indian ethos or the Hindu ethos is very clearly open to change. That is why Jawaharlal was able to bring in a law amending the Hindu Marriage Act or the Hindu property rights of women. But he did not have the guts. He did not even have the courage to talk about changing the Sharia or updating the Sharia. And to this day, let alone Jawaharlal, even the BJP has no guts. I would be very surprised if one day Shri Narendra Modi comes up and says that we have to update Sharia. For me, it would be a glorious day, but I have no hopes of this kind from him or from the RSS. because we do not think that in this country anybody has to reform except the Hindus. The minorities don't have to reform, the Muslims don't have to reform, the Christians don't have to reform, the Sikhs don't have to, the Jains don't have to be. And we are going to manufacture other new minorities like Lingayats, etc., who should become as orthodox as possible. Because you become a minority when you become classically orthodox. Your whole image of a minority, your whole exclusiveness of a community depends upon your becoming orthodox, not forward looking. Because the moment you say that, please be forward looking, please give up triple talaq, or please start changing your names, don't make Kulvinder a name for men as well as for women, please start having some new name in Sikh community, then that would be considered as an attack on the identity. So any reform for the minority is seen as a conspiracy to water down their identity. Whereas every obligation for Hindus to reform, the majorities to reform, is seen as their duty. So we are widening this whole gap, and we are creating a society which is neither based upon the classical Hindu dharmic values, nor are they values of enlightenment. They are not even Western values. They're not values of 19th century enlightenment, 18th, 19th century enlightenment of equality. They are not based upon Rousseau even. They are based upon a notion of creating equality by giving concession. First, you presume that there are certain victims and victims have to be de-victimized. So equality has come to be defined as de-victimization. Now, de-victimization is not a notion in any European 18th, 19th century system of thought. Either the utilitarians or people who believed in freedom, or Rousseau or the Romantics. The European thought does not admit of this kind of thing. If it believes in equality of man, then it is the equality of men. It is not the equality of men of certain kinds, of color and creed and language, etc. Now, the last thing I'll do very hurriedly, I'll try to do, is to show you how in our constitution this inequality has been enshrined. So I'm going to take, first of all, Article 25. You see, Article 25 to Article 30 are responsible for constitutionally enshrining a status of inequality among the Indian peoples. Now you can see here, this is Article 25, freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion. Subject to public order, morality and health, and to other provisions of this part, all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right freely to profess, practice, and propagate religion. There are four things here. Freedom of conscience. Can anybody translate this word conscience for me into Hindi or Sanskrit or Marathi or Telugu? इसके लिए कोई भारतीय भाषा में शब्द है कॉन्शियंस? महात्मा गांधी हमेशा अपनी कॉन्शियंस की बात सुनते थे और अंत में ये पता लगता था कि वो सिर्फ उनकी ही बात है, उनकी कॉन्शियस अगर अलाउ कर रही है उन्हें, so some deep cavern of your mind which only you know is conscience. It's a quasi Christian concept. Conscience. In India there is nothing like conscience. No Indian darshana believes in conscience. It believes in buddhi, it believes in viveka, it believes in right choice, it believes in choosing dharma or adharma, which is based upon a logic. If Rama had to kill Bali, then there was a logic of departing from the prescription of facing the enemy. And the logic was that if you face Bali, then half your power will go to him. So it was essential to hit him outside his field of vision. So there's a logic to it. You have to use your buddhi. And if you fail to use it, then it is adharma. Just as Bhishma performed adharma when he did not intervene when Draupadi was being disrobed. It was not a matter of conscience. Duryodhan says that he knows what is dharma, but he is too greedy to follow it. So, what you find here, conscience, is a quasi-Christian concept. This is the first problem. I can always say, I'm not going to fight for India because my conscience doesn't allow. This time, I'm not going to send my son into the army because my conscience doesn't allow. I can be a conscientious objector. बिना बुद्धि के मैं कॉन्शियस पर रिलाई करके कह सकता हूं. और गांधी जी ने जब सुभाष चंद्र बोस को हटाया था कांग्रेस की ऑफिस से, तो वो कॉन्शियस के बेसिस पे तो हटाया था. इतने सारे ब्लंडर्स हमने देखा है उनकी कॉन्शियस के, और हमने उस कॉन्शियस को यहां आर्टिकल 25 में डाला. And then we have right freely to profess, practice and propagate religion. Profess, yes, to say that I am so and so, I am Muslim, I am Hindu, I am Jain. Practice, granted, according to the prescriptions of your denomination. But propagate religion. Now, what does propagate mean? The Article 25 is giving religion the right to propagate. And we all know who is practicing this right. For the past 70 years, only Christians and Muslims are practicing this right. This right is not being practiced by Hindus, because Hindus do not proselytize historically. So when this article was written, it was known very well to Jawaharlal Nehru that the advantage of this article would be taken by Christians and Muslims and not by Hindus. And to this day, in reality, Hindus are not proselytizing. As a matter of fact, any attempt by Hindus to proselytize is considered an oppression on Christians and Muslims. It is considered an offense. Whereas practice of proselytization by a Christian is considered his right. And I have seen dozens of Christians saying that it is a command of Christ, according to Matthew 28:13, that they should proselytize. उनका धार्मिक अधिकार है हिंदुओं को क्रिश्चियन बनाना, और यही मुसलमानों के द्वारा कहा जाता है. This is what the Muslims also say, that dawa or conversion is something which is prescribed in the Quran, which is, it is true, and therefore they can practice it. And then they ask, is there any such prescription for Hindus in their scripture? क्या महाभारत में कहीं कहा गया है? क्या वेद में कहीं कहा गया है? Does any Hindu, so-called Hindu scripture lay down that convert others into your mat? In India, we had among the Buddhists a concept of dharma chakra pravartan, that is, propagating or preaching or talking about dharma. But it was not to save souls. There is a stark difference between the right to save souls and the right to talk and discuss. And today you know that the Hindu right or anybody's right to talk and discuss the contents of the Bible, the Quran, or the Hadith is now being reduced to an offense and is being called blasphemy. ये इनइक्वालिटी अंडर आर्टिकल 25 इतनी बढ़ गई है कि आज अगर मैं आपको कहूं कि हदीस में ये लिखा है तो आप मुझको ब्लास्फेमी के चार्ज पर मेरा गला काटने के लिए अपना धर्म समझते. So this is Article 25 and I think it needs to be amended. Now I come to Article 26. Freedom to manage religious affairs. This article gives every religious denomination or any section thereof to exercise rights that it stipulates. However, this right is to be exercised in the manner that is in conformity with morality, etc. Now, this is not exactly Article 26, but Article 26 largely means that I can fund my religion, I can donate, but I cannot be asked to donate to a denomination in which I don't believe or in which I don't want to. So, Article 26, as a matter of fact, is being practiced surreptitiously. Article 26 gives a Hindu a right to refuse donation to a Muslim or a Christian individually. It protects him from that. But in practice, it does not. Because when the state gives special awards and special money to minorities, then it is Hindu money which is being given. The taxpayers in this country are Hindus by and large. So Article 26 is being constantly flouted by the governments of India under the name of minority protection or under the name of promoting minority or protecting or whatever you may like to call this special concessionism or compensatory discrimination. Article 26 is being flouted. मैं इंडिविजुअली तो कह सकता हूं किसी चर्च से कि मैं आपको चंदा नहीं दूंगा, लेकिन मैं गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया से कैसे कह सकता हूं कि आप स्पेशल अवार्ड्स नहीं देंगे मुसलमानों को और ईसाइयों को. और एज अ मैटर ऑफ फैक्ट, गवर्नमेंट्स ऑफ इंडिया, कांग्रेस और बीजेपी, they are taking the money from Hindu temples, putting them in public exchequer and giving them to minorities, not only for Hajj, but for all kinds of concession. तो आर्टिकल 26 की खिल्ली तो स्टेट उड़ा रहा है. और मैं इतना अशक्त हूं कि मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता. आर्टिकल 27 देखिए. Article 27 reiterates, no person shall be compelled to pay any tax for promotion of any particular religion or denomination. हाँ, मैंने जो आर्टिकल 26 के बारे में कहा, let me just make a correction. This was about Article 27. Article 26 only says that I can give money to my own denomination. तो वो इतना harmful नहीं है. ये problem is 27. Now we come to 28, which has created havoc in the cultural landscape, religious landscape of India. इस आर्टिकल को आप देखिए, इट इज टाइटल्ड एज फ्रीडम to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship in certain educational institution. अब ये इसका आर्टिकल 28 का आर्टिकल 1 जो सेक्शन 1 है वो क्या कहता है? नो रिलीजियस इंस्ट्रक्शन शैल बी प्रोवाइडेड इन एनी एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन होली मेंटेन्ड आउट ऑफ स्टेट फंड्स। तो जो स्टेट फंड से मेजॉरिटी ऑफ स्कूल्स एंड कॉलेजेस और रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट्स चल रहे हैं देश में, उनके अंदर आप रिलीजियस इंस्ट्रक्शन नहीं दे सकते। और रिलीजियस इंस्ट्रक्शन की इंटरप्रिटेशन सन 50 से नेहरूवियन टाइम्स से लेकर कांग्रेस के राज से लेकर बीजेपी के राज में इंक्लूडेड क्या है कि आप कोई रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट नहीं पढ़ाएंगे, तो आप रामायण नहीं पढ़ाएंगे, महाभारत नहीं पढ़ाएंगे, वेद नहीं पढ़ाएंगे, आप कोई भी क्लासिकल टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडिया, मेडिवल टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडिया विच बिलोंग्स टू द हिंदू डोमिनेशन वो नहीं पढ़ाए, डिनोमिनेशन वो नहीं पढ़ाएंगे। तो आप हिंदू टेक्स्ट नहीं पढ़ाएंगे। अब प्रश्न उठता है कि इसके हिसाब से तो आप मुस्लिम टेक्स्ट भी नहीं पढ़ाएंगे ना? हाँ ठीक है, इसके हिसाब से आप कोई रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट बाइबल और कुरान भी नहीं पढ़ाएंगे, लेकिन यहां जो फॉरबिडिंग है उसके लिए एक स्पेशल कंसेशन आर्टिकल 30 में दे दिया जाता है, जिस पे अभी हम आएंगे। आर्टिकल 30 के अंदर आप बाइबल और कुरान पढ़ा सकते हैं और इंस्टीट्यूशंस खोल सकते हैं और मदरसे खोल सकते हैं, आप जो चाहे कर सकते हैं, जो जैसा भी रिलीजियस इंस्ट्रक्शन चाहे दे सकते हैं। तो अगर आर्टिकल 28 और 30 दोनों को मिलाकर देखा जाए तो उसका नेट रिजल्ट क्या हुआ है पिछले 70 साल में भारत में? What has happened? If you combine both Article 28 and 30 and see the result, that no Hindu text, so-called Hindu text, can be taught in school, college, or higher institute, whereas all the religious texts belonging to Muslims, Christians, and other minorities, and minorities which shall be born in future, they can all be taught. तो अगर आप हिंदू हैं तो आपके लिए एजुकेशन जो है वो एक एजुकेशन सिस्टम में नहीं हो सकती। इट हैज टू बी डन ओनली आउटसाइड privately, and as we know that it cannot happen, and therefore today we have a whole generation, 2 generation to 3 generation of Hindus who know nothing about their religious texts. और ये खुद में एक बहुत बड़ा खतरा भारत के आगे है और रिलीजियस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट का बहुत बड़ा कारण है। आर्टिकल 28 के बाद आप आर्टिकल 29 में आइए। Any section of citizens residing in India having a distinct culture, language of script, the right to conserve their culture and script, etc. So they can practice things through which they can nourish their culture, their language and their script. तो अगर आपका स्क्रिप्ट भी है, now you can see that this whole article is only meant for Muslims. It was meant so that script Urdu could be patronized. Language Urdu could be patronized. Distinct culture, Muslim culture, on the basis of which Jinnah asked Pakistan. And you can see that all over India, madrasas will not teach Telugu in Telugu area, but they will start teaching Urdu. In Tamil Nadu, they will not promote Tamil, they will promote Urdu. So it is an article which is entirely being interpreted and used by the Muslim community. to create a very special identity which goes against, I am saying, the multifarious cultural situation of India. And now I come finally to Article 30. All religious and linguistic minorities. यहाँ देखिए, religion is mentioned clearly. It is clearly mentioned that all religious and linguistic minorities have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. इसके बारे में कुछ ज्यादा कहने की जरूरत नहीं है, आप सब जानते हैं कि इस देश में क्रिश्चियंस ने फॉर्मल एजुकेशन को क्रिश्चियंस ने कैप्चर कर लिया और 1950 से इसको इस आर्टिकल के अंडर उनको बेस्ट प्रोटेक्शन मिला और देश के जो पहले ब्रिटिश टाइम के अंदर क्रिश्चियन कॉलेजेस और स्कूल्स थे उनको स्पेशल प्रोटेक्शन 1950 के बाद मिला और उनका स्टेटस सबसे ज्यादा है, सबसे अच्छा है क्रिश्चियन स्कूल्स एंड कॉलेजेस का। और इसी तरह से एट ए स्पेशल लेवल मदरसास हैव क्रॉप्ड अप इन लैक्स एंड लैक्स ऑल ओवर इंडिया। तो आर्टिकल 30 का मतलब ये है कि आप माइनॉरिटी क्रिश्चियन और मुस्लिम्स और बुद्धिस्ट और व्हाटएवर, बट इफेक्टिवली इट मींस क्रिश्चियंस एंड मुस्लिम, यू हैव द राइट टू टीच your religion, you have the right to manage your institutions, you have the right to make their courses, you have the right to teach whatever you want. So in a madrasa you can teach that Hindus are kafirs and they have a lower status than Muslims. Or in a seminary or in a Christian college you can teach that according to Christianity all non-Christians will go to hell. I am constrained to speak very bluntly, but then this is the truth. This kind of thinking, this kind of constitution, this kind of diversity in the name of minority protection has only created inequality. And it has created an absolute lack of equality, sub-equal status, what I call sub-equal status for Hindus. So the majority has come down to a sub-equal status and the minority has come to a hyper-equal status. We do not have equality. Either we have a hyper-equal communities or we have sub-equal communities. And the majority community is the sub-equal. And therefore, there have been smaller movements in the past where people have asked for equality for Hindu rights. Or there was a Hindu Charter of Demands about 4 or 5 years ago. But unfortunately, the Indian ruling class, whether it is the Congress or the BJP, they are unable to understand the real situation. Or to put it another way, they are not willing to come out of the groove. They are not willing to give up the political maneuvering that they have been doing for 70 years. And I think the citizens of India should stand up and rise and really establish and change this constitution so that all people living here are equal before law and the letter of the law as well.
I would like you to address instances of the present government, the BJP government, from which the Hindus had high hopes of when the government has not really heeded to the Hindu rights or actually trampled over the majority rights.
Well, the biggest example is the biggest example is the management of Hindu temples. The Hindu temples since 1935 have been taken over by the state, by the British at that time, and that situation continues. And all big and rich and well-to-do temples, which were meant to promote Hindu culture, Hindu religion, Hindu arts, Hindu sciences, which were meant for thousands of years to sustain education, not just to Hindus, others also, if they want to take it, they have been, I would say, robbed. I'm using a very, very, uh, a very, very harsh word. They have been robbed by the state. The state takes away the money, puts it in the exchequer, and uses it as it pleases according to the demands of the political party in power. You find right now in Tamil Nadu, temples are being razed to ground by the current government there because that government is entirely anti Hindu in many of its pursuits. They have this whole Dravidianist attitude where they consider that to be a Hindu is anti national. So, this is one example. And there are so many other examples. The Narendra Modi government has, by leaps and bounds, created special assistances of all kind for Muslims to appear in exams, to have certain educational benefits. And I fail to understand why you should do this just because you want their votes. Why can't you promote the education institutes so that all people can take benefit according to their need? Why can't you increase the contribution to educational kitty on the whole? Why can't it 10% of national GDP go into education so that everybody benefits? And then, of course, we need removal of Articles 29, 30, and 28. These articles have to be amended. Everybody should have a right to give religious instruction. Everybody should have the right to open institute and manage them. Why should only minorities? Why can't majority do it? It stands to reason. Make people equal. Why should I not work for my language or for my script? If I'm a majority, why should be I barred from doing it? Or why should my religious instruction not be taught in schools and colleges just because I happen to be the majority? So I think this very sinister kind of the sinister kind of planning which was done by Jawaharlal Nehru in framing of the constitution has now to be removed.
My second question, sir, you were talking about the origin of the word minority and majority, which was based on numbers. So,
Yeah.
isn't it true that the Indian government leaves it to the states to determine who are majority and who are minority, and even Hindus can be
No.
a minority in that state? Is that true?
Now, you see, there is absolute confusion. The term minority is not defined in the constitution. If the constitution doesn't define minority, then who can make a judgment on it? Not even the Supreme Court. Any judgment of a particular community or a person being minority is going to be uh, prejudiced. It is going to be according to the whims of the person who is making that judgment, because you have not defined that those who are only 5% of the population can be minority. You have not defined that minority can be 2%, 5%, or 10%. Today, 49.99 people percentage can be minority. This is the given situation. And it is sheer madness. Neither the Supreme Court of India nor the Indian Parliament has taken cognizance of this basic fact. And this is because our intentions are not honest. Our intentions are to play to the voter. We are in the business of vote hunting. We are not in the business of creating a equal and just and fair society.
Bharatji, according to the concept that you just brought up, the idea that the Modi government has actually played into it to reducing Hindus and disempowering Hindus, is it not, according to me, what I feel, that even this Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas has actually empowered and emboldened the Muslims and actually facilitated them taking their computer in one hand to actually crush the Hindus instead of do the Vikas for the Muslims?
Yes, but that is because of the constitutional provision. You see, if it emboldens Muslim or any other community, fanatic Christians, to be aggressive towards Muslims, then that is because you are providing them a constitutional concession. Otherwise, if they are really equal before law, they will not be able to do it. You see, a Christian can knock on my door and say, please read this Bible. I'd like to preach Christianity to you. Because my Jesus told me that I should go and proselytize. And Article 25 says that propagation of religion means that I can knock on your door. Now, this is done by Muslims and Christians according to the constitution. You will ask me a simple question, why can't Hindus not do it? Well, when Hindus start doing it, when Hindus says, "Aao ghar wapsi kare," then they are considered as criminals. So when a Hindu goes and says, let's do ghar wapsi, or let me convert a Muslim into Hindu, back into Hinduism, then you say that it is oppression of the minorities. Then you run to the United Nations, then you go to the to CNN and to BBC. But when the Christian comes and knocks at my door or a Hindu's door, then I say, yes, that is his constitutional right to propagate. And then the man comes up and quotes either the Quran or the Bible. So this is a legal problem. It's a constitutional problem which has to be addressed. It cannot be addressed by stupid statements like "Hum sabka DNA ek hai." We all have the same DNA. Of course, we have the same DNA coming from chimpanzees. हम सब चिंपैंजियों की औलाद हैं, हमारा डीएनए वहां से आया है. तो आज मैं देख रहा हूं कि मोहन भागवत एंड वेरियस अदर लीडर्स आर टॉकिंग सच sentimental things instead of addressing the real question. Real question ये है कि आपने माइनॉरिटी को स्पेशल कंसेशन दिया हुआ है, भाई आप ये कब खत्म करेंगे? What you have to do is first of all define minority. How can 20% of a population of a country be a minority? Muslims are 20% or 25%. How can, even if they are 15%, how can 15% of population of a country be minority? Then, why should they have special rights? You see, if studying religion is good for 5 people, then it is good for 5,000 people also. अगर धर्म की शिक्षा 5 लोगों के लिए अच्छी है, तो 5,000 के लिए भी तो अच्छी है ना? Dharma is not something, religion is not something, spirituality is not something which goes according to numbers. It goes according to raising the standard of consciousness in a human being. So why should minority only have the right to study religion and establish their institution? Why not the majority? Study of religion is good for everybody. It has nothing to do with numbers. Just a study of the constitution or study of modern law, or study of philosophy or science or art or music is good for everybody. Similarly, study of religion is good for everybody. So we can see that this was a sinister plan to divide Indian population, devised initially by the colonial masters, and then the political parties, namely Congress and BJP, who came into power, have continued it for the same very reason, because it gives them the ability to manipulate, to divide and rule. So the Congress and the BJP are following the colonial strategy. 13 years of BJP rule has done nothing to alter.
So, Bharatji, my question is very simple. When we talk of amendments of these articles from 23 to 30, especially, so
Yes.
they come under fundamental rights. So, we have seen taking examples from recent incidents, whether it's Farm Bill or the recent Agniveer plan, the population, they are like protesting, and for a simple farm bill, they literally hold the national capital to ransom on the day of national importance, and government took back those bills. So how pragmatic do you think this idea of amending the constitution is, and how will it get support from the population, as well as how would the Supreme Court and all intervene?
You see,
What can be
it
the
is,
process?
yes, it is a matter of opinion building. I am not asking people to come out on the streets and start agitating, because that would be the worst way of doing it. This is something which has to be done by dialogue. This is something which has to be done by discussion. This is something which has to be done through various media, such as schools and colleges, such as television, such as social media, such as programs like Sangam Talks, Jaipur Dialogue, Bharti, and so many other people. It has to be done in a very rational manner. Like what I have been saying for 1 hour is not against any section of people. I am not blaming a particular religion for this. I am not asking people to seek some kind of a redressal. I am only asking for providing justice and amending the law. Now, this is something which has to be done at a very wide scale, and the government should allow it. What has happened is that the government suppress this. The governments do not talk about the variety of religious opinion that people hold in this country. You see, why is it that in schools and colleges there is nothing like a study of comparative religion? कि भाई इस्लाम में ये वैल्यूज हैं, क्रिश्चियनिटी में ये वैल्यूज हैं, हिंदू का मतलब वैष्णव, जैन इत्यादि में ये वैल्यूज हैं. Where are they taught? Do you think they are taught in schools? Are they taught in colleges? Now, why can't you teach them? Why can't a 6th class boy or girl be taught that these are the fundamental beliefs of Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Advaitavadis, and Hindus, and these are the fundamental beliefs of Muslims, and these are the fundamental beliefs of Christians? Why can't we talk about those fundamental principles to our children so that the children can understand, compare, choose, and talk about it themselves and express their opinion? We have left this whole thing to certain theologians. In the case of Islam, we have left it to certain Ashraf Maulvis, and the Maulvis are all the time terror stricken by the prospect of Islam in danger. We have left it to certain Christian proselytizers to talk about Christianity. And now the atmosphere is such that if you talk about any Islamic or Christian text, then you are threatened with blasphemy. Even Sikhs are threatening you with blasphemy. And I have from childhood heard all kinds of criticisms, and sometimes very dirty criticisms of Rama and Krishna. From my very early childhood, from school days and college days, I have heard that Krishna was a lecherous person. I have heard this time and again. I have heard this from professors. So there is an inequality. Hindu bashing is something which is considered progressive, legitimate. Whereas even mentioning or quoting a text from the Holy Quran or the Holy Bible is considered an act of aggression. This is the truth about India. And this is what is happening. I don't have to remind you of the specific cases that are happening today. You know them very well. So we have to come out of this state of paranoia that if I talk about your book, then it is blasphemy. If you talk about my book, then that is progressive thought. Do you think anybody will make a speech like what I am doing in the Indian Parliament? I am a teacher and I can talk what I think is right. And I have no power except the power of my words. And I cannot presume to do something which is beyond my power. मैंने इसलिए कही कि लोगों को ये पार्लियामेंट में डिस्कशंस करने चाहिए. ये डिस्कशन होते नहीं हैं.
भरत जी, आपने जैसे अभी कहा कि हिंदू लोग ईसाइयों का या किसी की भी स्क्रिप्चर से कोट करे तो दैट इज कंसिडर्ड ब्लास्फेमी, बट इट इज आल्सो कंसिडर्ड ब्लास्फेमी फॉर हिंदूज टू टॉक अबाउट हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर्स. हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर्स की भी अथॉरिटी जो है वो मुसलमानों और उनको दे दी गई है.
आप बिल्कुल सही कह रही हैं.
बहुत अफसोस होता है.
बिल्कुल. वो इसीलिए कि आर्टिकल 28 के अंडर हिंदुओं को हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर पढ़ाए नहीं गए. और देखिए, मैं एक चीज और कहूंगा यहाँ. In the Hindu tradition, there is nothing like scripture. In the Hindu tradition, there are philosophical texts. और उसके अंदर आप जो चाहें अमेंडमेंट कर सकते हैं. उसमें से आप कुछ और नया निकाल सकते हैं. उसको ऑल्टर करके एक नया टेक्स्ट बना सकते हैं. और ऐसा कोई टेक्स्ट नहीं है सिवाय वेद के और उपनिषद के जिसमें एडिशन और ऑल्टरेशन पिछले 2 या 3 हजार साल में नहीं हुए. सिवाय वैदिक संहिता के और उपनिषद और आरण्यक इत्यादि के अतिरिक्त ऑल इंडियन टेक्स्ट और हिंदू टेक्स्ट और भारतीय टेक्स्ट, व्हाटएवर यू वुड लाइक टू कॉल देम, उनके अंदर एडिशंस और अमेंडमेंट्स कालांतर में होते आए हैं. जो मनुस्मृति आज से शायद 2500 साल पहले लिखी गई होगी, वो 2000 साल पहले तक बदल चुकी थी और 1000 साल पहले तक और बदल चुकी थी. इसके प्रमाण मनुस्मृति में ही है. हमारे यहाँ ये ट्रेडिशन ही नहीं है कि जो किसी ने पहले लिख दिया उसके अंदर चेंज या अमेंडमेंट नहीं हो सकती. ये सारा का सारा जो एक फैब्रिकेशन है, ये क्रिश्चियंस और मुस्लिम्स के द्वारा क्रिएट किया गया है. That their text is what is the original text spoken by their prophet. We all know that we don't have the original Bible. We know that Bible has been amended, that there have been all kinds of versions and all kinds of gospels. All Christian scholars, dozens of them have written about it. And the same is about the Holy Quran. Many things we know. It is not as if the Quran which is in circulation today is exactly what was spoken by Gabriel to the prophet. तो हम सब इस हिस्ट्री को जानते हैं, लेकिन हमने ये एक बहुत बड़ा क्रिएशन कर लिया है कि ये सब टेक्स्ट जो हैं वो इनवायलेबल हैं और बदलेंगे नहीं. Whereas in the Hindu tradition, we are always open to change. अब जिस कल्चर के अंदर हम डिस्कशन, वाद विवाद, चेंज, एडजस्टमेंट करना चाहते हैं, आज आप उसका मुंह बंद करना चाहते हैं by bringing in blasphemy law. तो सच्चाई ये है कि आप अपने टेक्स्ट दुनिया पढ़े और जाने वो नहीं चाहते, क्योंकि आप चाहते हैं कि केवल आप ही का उसके ऊपर एक कंट्रोल रहे. You want a particular class of Maulvis to talk about the Quran, Hadith, and Sharia. You don't want anybody else to talk about it, to discuss it openly, to discuss it rationally. To discuss things rationally is not an aggression, it is an act of friendship. And I think we have to assert that kind of thought now. That let us all talk about each other's articles of faith without any malicious or intention. We should talk about it with good intentions, with friendly intentions. But we must talk and discuss. Now, this is essential order of the day, and this is the need of the hour as I see it.
Would you
Thank
like
you.
to give any concluding remarks about what is the way forward today, or any suggestions to what the
I
present
think
government can do?
I just ended up making a concluding remark that in all good faith and friendliness, we have to discuss each other's articles of faith or theological texts or religious texts with the best intentions. And we have to do it patiently. We have to do it in an atmosphere of amity and an atmosphere of reason. It is rationality that should prevail. And if we are able to do this, then through this dialogue, through this discussion, and honest analysis, historical, literary, epigraphic, all kinds of analysis, a better truth will emerge, and our young people will be able to choose their own way. After all, we should not be so much worried about elders like me. We should be worried about our children, and we should teach them to think, to examine, to understand whether it is a given religious text or a contemporary text. They should be able to investigate and choose their path. And when they choose their path, they should be able to have examples of great people in history. Mahajano yen gataha sapantha. The great people have traversed a certain road. Let us be aware of it.